And when
I hit the button already. All right, everybody, we are back. We had a moment there. I think we talked about too many taboo things, and YouTube decided like, okay, you're done, and cut us off. And then Joaquin and I were just chopping it up, and I hit the button to start the stream, but there's like a 5 or 6 second delay, so you get to hear Joaquin and I talking right before the clock started ticking there. So Joaquin, didn't mean to cut you off with the show starting, but you hit the button, and then it takes like 7 or 8 seconds to go. So you started talking again. Like, I don't mean to be rude. But
no.
before we were like unceremoniously cut off, for those of you who might have missed the show, let me just like do the intro. We were kind of going down a really good path, talking about like geopol stuff like that. We're gonna get right back into it. But if you're just watching this and you didn't watch the part 1 of this, go back and watch that. And if you're just gonna watch part 2, make sure you look in the link in the description for my friend Xoaquin Flores and all of his links. I've got your Patreon and I've got, I believe, your Telegram in there. So subscribe to Joaquin. Joaquin, seriously, you're like one of the hardest working guys in this game. As you know, I'm on your live shows as much as I can be, meaning like attending your Telegram lives that you do, I'd say at least 3 days a week and sometimes 5 or 6. And that doesn't count your other stuff you're doing. I'm just talking about your main channel. You've got Love in the Apocalypse. You got so many things going on. I don't know anybody who is able to orate as much as you do per week in this without like losing their mind. So you work your ass off. You do really good work.
Thanks.
So that's it. All the links in the description. But Joaquin, if you could see if we can sort of restructuralize, if that's even a damn word, where we were kind of talking about, what might be going on with Venezuela. We've got Colombia. Colombia is supposed to be our friend, but maybe our actions are pointing otherwise. Venezuela is supposed to be our enemy, but maybe certain things that are not happening are sort of going the other way. It's a weird thing where, I learned like 15 years ago from my dad, like in the dating world. I remember I was having a hard time. My game fell off or something. And my dad's like, don't listen to what the girls say. Just watch what they do. And I don't think that just applies to females. I think that's just humans. If you watch what people do rather than what they say, you're going to learn a lot more about them. And what you were saying before we got cut off, I think relates to that when it comes to Venezuela, the non-embargo that's going on. So maybe maybe like if you could take it from there.
Yeah, so the U.S. has an embargo on Venezuela, but they're not enforcing it on other countries, right? Like, so China is a big purchaser of Venezuela. They have a lot of purchasers, and there have been, the European Union has sanctions on, or embargo on Venezuela as well, but I guess the world has learned about how that actually works behind the scenes with like shadow fleets. Like now that we've learned about this through the attempts with Russia, right? And now we've seen Russia, like, so it's, you get oil and it gets transferred onto another rig that flies under the flag of another country, or the oil gets sold as Guyanese oil, but it's Venezuelan or whatever. So you have, India is a purchaser, they have a lot of, they could have more exports, right? And if they had more exports, then ExxonMobil would even make more money. But ExxonMobil is like plugged in, like they're in with Venezuela. So that, but it's broader than just that. Like it's more than just markets, right? Like the word geopolitics like should not be confused with geoeconomics, which is like geopolitics is really about, the land and the power. You're talking about politics like power and geo like land. So land power is the foundation, and hegemony and spheres of influence speak to geopolitics, right? And like in the original German iteration of geopolitics, geopolitik, you're also talking about the quality of the humanity or the type of humans that inhabit, that are integrated into that space. Like it takes a holistic or integrated view of the humanity, the land, and the power as a single object, so to speak, as a single subject, instead of categorizing separately or right. So the United States, you have to have a broad understanding. What I've been writing about or wrote about almost 10 years ago, even I think it was even before Trump comes into power, is that the United States is going to pull out of a lot of these old world entanglements. Policing the Pacific Rim is part of an economic and military-industrial complex agreement with the British that relates to the Commonwealth countries like Australia and New Zealand. So you'll continue to see like a U.S. Pacific Fleet presence there. But the idea that they're going to like take on the Chinese, or that something's going to happen at the Korean DMZ, or like the United States could easily pull out of Okinawa or something like this as well, right? But as we're seeing now, they're pulling out of the Eastern Mediterranean and the Persian Gulf. And one of there are reasons that they are doing that, right? And then there are consequences of that which become reasons also, if that makes sense. So in other words, like in the same way that I could say like I have a conclusion and that conclusion becomes the premise for the next part of the argument that I'm going to make. The United States is like pulling out of the Eastern Mediterranean, just like they're pulling out of Eastern Europe, right? Because it doesn't make sense. Like the returns, the ROI on that is very bad. And then there's also derivative and there are, let's say, downstream costs associated with that are even larger than the non-sustainable cost at the first take. You see what I'm saying? So it's like a collapsing. It's like an unsustainable structure. So then once you have this understanding that like we live in the time of presidents that are going to be in power for a long time, number one, like as long as possible. Like think about Putin, think about XJP, right? The idea the United States can be agreement capable while they have this power going back and forth, and that these policies are going to change radically every 4 years or 8 years, is not workable in a world based in realism, right? So during like the unipolar moment of American post-world Cold War hegemony, like from the 90s and stuff, you could like have this illusion of unpopular leaders that just get voted out, which if you think about it doesn't make a lot of sense. Like how we've defined democracy as, or republic, constitutional republics, what have you, with democratic features as being like, that means that every 4 or 8 years we have to replace them because they're inevitably bad, or they're inevitably supposed to be unpopular, or they're supposed to do things that aren't right.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. You had a little bit of a connectivity
Sure.
issue there, but you're back. You're good to
Right.
go.
So I don't know what I was saying at the time that.
Well, actually, we didn't lose that much of what you were saying. You could just continue. We'll get it.
Okay. So
if I knocked you off your track there, and this even goes back to what I was saying before. Like, watch what they do, not what they say. Yes. And in unipolar world, we can have this like back and forth between, oh, there's this Democrat that wants this, and there's this Republican that wants that, and they switch every 4 years or whatever. Those kind of like situations. And I think where you might have been going with this was that as the world becomes multipolar, it
Right.
might be that there needs to be a more apparent stability in like U.S. doctrine. That's what I was
Yeah, you
thinking.
need to
That's
have more stability in U.S. doctrine, right? And then you have these big players that are organized vertically. So we were saying how ExxonMobil was pushed into Venezuela, out of Venezuela in 2007, and and Chevron and ExxonMobil are in Guyana now, but you know there are, Chevron is one of the leading uh, private oil companies in Venezuela. There's like 5 major projects that they have there. And I needed this cup of coffee. Like, forgive my lapsus if I said ExxonMobil earlier. I was speaking of Chevron. So I think that, but both of those companies have projects or potential projects to either start or return to in Russia that are the subject of Alaska talks. So, like, the conflict is not, the potential conflict is actually not about oil, except for Israel's part of it. And there are the most obvious thing for Israel, and like what the Abraham Accords could accomplish, right, is to have access to Saudi oil. It's Saudi Arabia has the second largest oil reserves in the world, but the first largest is Venezuela.
yep.
There are costs associated with the transit, whereas quite literally you could just have a physical pipeline from Saudi Arabia to Israel that would just solve the problem. But that's not going to happen unless the Palestinians are being well respected and they have like some semblance of a prospering autonomous region. It doesn't have to be a UN country, like whatever that means anymore, but it has to be a physical place where, the police officers on the street are Palestinians, where they have a militia that's like Egyptians, Jordanians, and Palestinians, maybe Azeris for a while, who knows, maybe Pakistanis for a while, who knows. But the idea this is going to be like a colony or settler project of Israel is going to preclude Israel the opportunity of having a normalized relationship with Saudi Arabia, right? So this is what Trump wants to have happen also. Like, he has a very good relationship with MBS. In terms of the symbolism of communications for that segment of humanity, including elites who take very big things from symbols, which is important, don't get me wrong. My analysis is not driven by that. But those, comms are also understood by elites. Like the sword dance that Trump does with the Saudis is a huge communication. These are very big, important things, as were the Abraham Accords. This is about normalizing regions in the countries in the region relationship with Israel, but those countries can't do that for like 10 different reasons if the Palestinians are being treated as they have been for the past 6, 7 decades. So Machado represents the Nobel Peace Prize, right? Like, she represents all the people behind that. And there's this very sad and cynical ecosystem, Nick, where the very people who are both the hardline Zionists and also the most radical pro-Palestinian activists that are backed by Soros are actually on the same page, right? Because they're both saying the same thing. Like, right? They're both saying there can't be any solution unless it's final and total, right? Like, there's no...
That's some verbiage right there.
Right? So they're on the pro-Palestinian side, they're bent on the politics of, no solution is good enough that we can accept, even if Palestinians will accept it. Like, we refuse to allow Palestinians, like, we are, I don't want to, like, whatever, but like someone who I was not happy with when he said it, like Scott Ritter, like, he withdrew his support for the Palestinians. Like, thank God he doesn't matter. But like, there are 5 or 20 people that listen to him. And when Ritter said that he's withdrawing his support for the Palestinians when some of the structures of Hamas issued a statement in support of HTS, al-Shaddad, Julani's group, taking power in Damascus, right? And it's like as if the Palestinians are not entitled to their own politics. It's kind of like imperialism of anti-imperialism. You see what I mean? Like, it's still Westerners dictating terms to what the Palestinians can or should accept, like not what they believe is best for them, right? And this gets back to all of the stupid criticism of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, and you had the anti-imperialist left that was criticizing it, and they were citing these bogus reports from the UN, the World Food Fund or whatever, and that's McCain's daughter is the head of that. And it just came out like a few weeks ago that they were the ones leaking information to Mossad about the location of people gathering for food and et cetera, identities of people in Hamas and deeper things like this. So it's like it was. Meanwhile, the GHF, which like Trump got Israel to co-sign, was actually feeding 2 million people every day, like every day, not every week, not in a month. It's a huge difference. So what's her name? Cynthia McCain, or no, what's her name?
I forget her name.
Yeah.
I'll
yeah.
look it up.
But yeah, actually, if you can look up the scandal as well.
Which scandal?
It's the UN World Food scandal. It's McCain, UN food relief.
Cindy McCain?
Yes, Cindy McCain. Cindy.
And internet's not going to talk about the scandal.
Oh.
What's the name of it's the World Food Scandal?
Yeah, let me see. Let me see here.
World Food Program.
Yes.
2010 report, rampant corruption in the WFP's operations in Somalia, where an estimated 50% of food delivered was being stolen by the agency's own personnel, contractors, armed militias, including radical Islamists. 3 Somali businessmen were found to have secured about 80% of the WFP's $200 million transport contracts through a long-standing cartel, with one staging fake hijackings to sell food aid in local markets.
Local markets. Yeah, that's in Somalia, but the same thing was happening in Gaza. But so it's Cindy McCain as executive director of the UN World Food Program.
Got it.
WFP, right? And so the scandal around that is that she was leaking to the Israelis information to the detriment of Palestinian leadership, is the long and short, or Palestinian people.
Or is it like that? Basically, like they could hijack the food. The Israelis could see that the food was maybe hijacked and resold.
That would be part of it. Part of it. But there were larger security issues going on that jeopardized Palestinian leadership or Palestinian structures as well, like giving the targets and stuff for Israel to strike things, maybe even. So it was anyway. But not digressing on Gaza, but just understanding Israel's position with energy. And there are, like the UK, recognizing Palestine, but it doesn't do anything to recognize Palestine. And recognizing Palestine is not to make like a biblical reference or religious reference, but like recognizing God that is, believing that God exists is not the same thing as like loving God, right? Like the devil believes in God, right? So like recognizing Palestine doesn't do anything to like empower Palestine. It just says like, okay, we agree that you exist, but they haven't opened a Palestinian embassy or started serious bilateral talks with the Palestinian Authority, Fatah, or the PLO, any of these people. Like there's nothing of substance going on concretely or even optically. Like they're not even pretending. It was just a statement made by Starmer, right? But in reality, the same group that's been behind the global warming hoax, et cetera, are the same people that are behind the most radical elements of the Western pro-Palestine movement. Like this should not be confused with the people of Palestine and the West Bank and Gaza. Right? They're entitled to their own politics. They're entitled to their own resistance on the Algeria model of resistance under international law, and that's quite broad. But the things that they're willing to accept are for them to accept on their terms, like not on some standard of. It's deeply psychological, right? But this is something which the writer and kind of philosopher in a way, Edward Said, has written about in a number of essays. He doesn't touch on it in his work on Orientalism, but later on he starts to write about it in his writings on Palestine. And he's talking about this another type of colonial mentality of Westerners that are, in a sense, like projecting onto Palestine all the things that they find lacking in themselves. And the thing is that some of those things are true, but then some of those things are not true. Like some of those things that are being projected onto Palestinians are not true about Palestinians. In other words, they're not a monolithic, they're not a hive mind. Like there's individuals that have different ideas, like in Palestine, just like you and I, just like people in the world do. And to pedestalize them is like a bird, like a cage made of gold is a cage nonetheless. Like to trap them on the standard of the noble savage is to deprive them of the fullness of their humanity, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, so you're going to have good ones and bad ones. Like they're human beings. They're a group of human beings. There's going to be good apples and bad apples. And it is perfectly fine if they want to accept an agreement that provides stability and development and progress and growth and life that isn't like a UN recognized state, like whatever that means today, like you have in Russia, like you have Chechnya, you have Dagestan, you have the Tatar Republic. Like these are like autonomous republics in Russia. Like they have sovereignty, a high degree of sovereignty within that sphere, right? And in the 21st century, with rapid communication and rapid transit, like if the Palestinian zone is going to be a co-prosperity zone of the Saudis and the Egyptians and the Qataris, and if the Israelis are allowed to have access to some of the fruits of that, then what is the issue? So it's like, it's so interesting because among the communist left, they're the most hardline about what the Palestinians need. Like they must have a state. Like that's the communist line, is that the Palestinians must have a state. But it's so interesting because you would think they would have an analysis of the UN as being essentially a structure of imperialism or a structure of late capitalism meant to manage conflict between, effectively bourgeois imperialist powers to mitigate or delay the threat of cataclysmic inter-imperialist conflict, like on the Marxist model, right? And even in the academic sphere, you would be talking about Wallerstein and people like this. So there's too many contradictions and hypocrisies, even in their own insistence that Palestine has to be a state. And there are no doubt like legitimate factions of Palestinians that see that as the solution or the outcome, right? But it's not all of them. And secondly, you need to have infrastructure and reality built first, that you have assets that invested people are defending before you can have like a legal entity like a state, right? So this is the thinking on Palestine, right? But Machado in Venezuela, like she's trying to reinforce Netanyahu's power, right? See, Netanyahu's the one that calls her to congratulate her on winning the Nobel Prize, right? And this this was very similar to when Netanyahu calls Biden to congratulate him on the election that Trump, this was on day one, this was on November 6th. This was Trump had not conceded. He still never conceded, but he wasn't even the votes were still being counted, right? When Netanyahu called Biden to say congratulations. So you have Netanyahu knows who Machado is. Trump says, I don't know who she is. So guys, check out part 1 where Nick breaks down. I'm getting coffee, and I think Nick breaks down exactly what that means. I don't know who she is.
Yeah, just and it's really quick too. It's a disavowalment. It's I got nothing to do with any of that. Just at least that's how I read it.
It is. That's right. I mean, it's a disavowalment, and so these debates and these conversations about Venezuela can get very polarizing, Nick. Very polarizing, because you have people saying, oh, the United States is going to attack Venezuela and they're going to remove Maduro, right? And the thing is that those are two different claims. You have to unpack that. But the polarizing part is that the reaction is well, you don't know that, and not so fast, right? This is not necessarily what's going on at all here. So let's unpack that. And then number one, attacking Venezuela, whatever that means, and removing Maduro are two separate claims. And if the model is that Maduro is going to be removed, which he could be, we're just talking about probabilities here, right? We're just trying to understand the world, right? I don't work for Trump. I don't work for Maduro. I don't have skin in game here, except for peace is the outcome as a human being. I don't like people dying and stuff, right? So
imagine that.
But those are two different, right? I mean, those are two different claims, though, right? So then so unpacking that, it's number one, the United States could attack Venezuela, but look at the way that they attacked Iran. That was an attack that was part of a strategic de-escalation. And it wasn't just a strategic de-escalation unilaterally. At the time, I was forecasting and explaining it immediately post facto that, oh, this has all the telltale signs of Iran and the U.S. before the U.S. attacked Iran at the end of to end the 12-day war. People thought this was the beginning of the next phase of a war. There were all types of analysts saying that this is now the escalation. This is now going to be an occupation. And I was saying, no, this is the end of this. This is how we're ending it. And that is what happened. And so then it's how did I get that right? And I got it right because I looked at what was actually at stake and who was invested in this, right? And I said at the time that this is no doubt that the U.S. and Iran coordinated that, okay, the United States is going to attack Iran, and then Iran is going to attack a U.S. base in the region, right? Which is what happened. And then, and I explained it that way. And then a couple of weeks ago, an interview comes out from Iran. Like, I'm sure no one on earth has seen this in the English speaking world unless you're like a real wonk, like a real policy wonk on Mideast stuff. But we shared it on the New Resistance channel, the translated version of it. And it's a high-ranking minister of Iranian parliament explaining that, in fact, Marco Rubio and their foreign minister coordinated to end the 12-day war by having this exchange that was limited. I was showing from the Maxar satellite images that bunker busters were never used on Isfahan or Fordo. I mean, it looks just like a Tomahawk strike. It looks nothing like bunker busters. You see, there's no evidence that B bombers were used over the skies in Iran, nor would the trust level between the US and Iran been high enough to fly those bombers over Iranian skies, because those could have nukes and Iran, Trump could have been tricking Iran.
I mean, to be fair, you can put nukes on the end of a Tomahawk as well.
You can.
You know, to be.
That's
but I mean,
right. Yes.
But
They
still,
are nuclear
I think
capable.
that I think there's a little more of a concern when you got actual B-2s flying over the country. Like,
yeah, I mean, the platform for nuclear warheads on Tomahawks has been discontinued, but
I was unaware of that.
Yes, but it is a potentiality. You are correct.
But I didn't know the platform was discontinued. I don't know the details on that, but it sounds to me
like
that
doesn't mean that they don't have them in stock.
Yeah. You just say they don't make them anymore.
That's right. The launcher, they don't have that in their system, like as a doctrine, and there are not, like, under the treaty agreements between the US and nuclear powers, your nuclear weapons are declared and openly and registered with other treaty participants all the time. And there are no nuclear armed Tomahawks officially in the registry on any US vessels. That's what I'm trying to say.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's just on paper, they don't exist.
Right. They're decommissioned or they're back home in the US.
So, okay, so if it's got to be like, well, I don't know. I don't want to get too far in the weeds on that.
Yeah, in the woods, yeah. But anyway, so back to Venezuela. I guess we're kind of digging into this Venezuela stuff. So it's increasingly looking like the Venezuela thing is tightly connected to Israel. And that is, more going in the direction that, especially the way that Trump was dissed with a Nobel Prize over Venezuela. Like these all very much, it's the symbolism plus the geopolitical analysis plus the geoeconomic analysis. Like, you can't just favor one over the other. You can't just look at one perspective or one angle, and it certainly won't behoove you to look at like no angles or no, there are a lot of people that are just default paranoid or black-pilled that the United States is just going to start wars. They think that war is an option, or that it's something that the US can do if it wants to. And if you followed what was happening in Ukraine and the statements that Lloyd Austin was making when he was defense secretary, like, he was very clear that like supplies of a lot of US things can't sustain this. So like there's a little clip going around when like the Republican Jewish whatever committee or Republican American Zionist, not AIPAC, but another committee, another group, had some get together a few days ago, and some clips of that have been circulating. And Lindsey Graham is speaking to them, and probably people are distracted by how ugly and Zionistic the things he's saying are. But in that, he says, we are out of bombs. Like, he was trying to make that like a boast, like, we've used so many bombs that we're out.
Well, it sounds to me like that's a backward message. And that we've been saying the same thing, like when it comes to Ukraine. I think Russia has stockpiled enough just artillery to run this war for years.
That's right.
And they manufacture like an order of magnitude above the entire combined West. Like they they
Yes,
got,
yes.
we're not really producing a whole lot of weapons over here. Like,
No, they're not being made. I mean, there's a very bad economy that works. It's more of a integrated. The military-industrial complex is integrated into the stock market. It's integrated into wealthy families, and their dividends and their profits are then, they are the private owners of it, but it's like they're clear, they're approved. It's like it's on the Nazi model, except people are not wearing, red armbands with swastikas on them. Like, it's not a communist model, it's a Nazi fascist corporatist model. Like, in other words, you have, on paper, they're privately owned, so these vested powerful families are the ones that get the profits, right? But so the military industrial complex goods are marked up ridiculously, right? So, but then those families that are the shareholders and owners of these companies, either joint stock, publicly traded, et cetera, they then invest those into other things globally or in the country, but more globally. And that's also a problem, because then our interests are divided. Like, if we have American families that are making most of their money on the first iteration from weapon sales, and then these people, or some of their investments are in South Korea, and then other people, their investments are in Taiwan, or others are in Colombia or France, or they are they're invested into the British Stock Exchange or City of London, banks, etc. Right? These can go in different directions and can bring, the empire can become fractured when its elites are invested in different parts of the world, and then when those parts of the world kind of come into collision with each other for different reasons.
well, wouldn't you suggest that that's the whole sort of plan of globalism, is to get different countries invested in each other such that they can be controlled? Like, any given country that can produce all of its own stuff is hard to control, right? So like Russia can make anything it needs to make. It has all its natural resources.
Yes.
Maybe they, need to start making cars or something. But in the end, even if like Russia just worked with China, they really don't need to rely on a bunch of other countries to get things done between the two of them.
That's right.
Right. So like
That's
the US,
right. Yeah, they don't need it. That's right.
like the US, like we rely on China for refined strategic metals. Therefore, China can hold that over our head, right? So if we just like refined our own strategic metals, although it might be at the detriment of our ecology, because that's a pretty toxic thing to do. But if we did that, China wouldn't have that to hold over our heads. We'd be less controllable. So that's why monetarily, like, or I should say, like fiscally, or from an investment standpoint, if you have like these Western weapons games, and then the money made from that gets put over here in London, and over here in China, and over here in Singapore, and over here in other, then you're like, if the whole financial picture takes a hit, then policy is affected by that because of the like financial outcomes, right?
Right. I mean, so then just concretely imagine, so you have the U.S. military industrial complex, right, which is taxpayer funded, right? So the liabilities and the losses are socialized, but the profits are privatized. So you have like an ethical moral problem there, right? First of all. Then now look at the profits.
People take the
now
loss,
then imagine
and the
some
oligarchs
of these
make
families,
the wins.
That's right.
The people
cases,
take the hit,
right?
but the oligarchs continue to profit. That's kind of what you're saying, more or less, right?
That's what it is. I mean, this is crony capitalism. So this is corporatism, right? Or you can call it socialism for the rich. So what you get is, imagine though, is that some of these families are investing in Saudi Arabia, for example, and others are investing in Israel, right? So then what happens if what happens if they have a problem with each other, or what happens if Israel can't actually get energy from Saudi Arabia because they have such a stupid policy on Palestine, right? So this is what I'm saying about Venezuela, is that Trump is on board with the Arabs to make good with the Israelis, to do something normalized and human and forward-looking and visionary with Gaza. There are others who want to keep Gaza an undeveloped zone of human Palestinian misery and subjugation, while virtue signaling that they care more about the Palestinians on the left, and while saying I stand with Israel no matter what, meaning Netanyahu Likudnik politics no matter what on the right. So they have this left-right game on Palestine-Israel is like what Trump has been trying to punch through, and the optics can be very ugly at times. He also gets misquoted. There's a lot of narrative and framing. I don't like a lot of the optics either, but I separate myself and like from analyzing what more objectively as possible as I can see going on. So with Venezuela, Machado's been doing lots of signaling to Netanyahu. And that's what you were talking about, is like, basically it's the symbol is we're going to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and we're going to move our embassy there, right? But if you watch her interview with Don Jr., right, like she's saying how she's going to open up Venezuelan oil to endless U.S. exploitation and profit, right? The problem is that Chevron is already there, and then ExxonMobil wants to return, and they can return, right? But they're in Guyana. But Chevron also just moved into Guyana, and Chevron moves into Guyana. Interestingly, then Maduro moves into Guyana. So now you have to look at the Russian investment into the Venezuelan oil company, which is called PDVSA. So the Russians are invested into PDVSA, but the Americans are also invested into PDVSA. They're invested as co-profit shares through Chevron. So what I was saying is that in 2007, a decision was made to do it this way, and Exxon decided to exit and to go into Guyana. But what Guyana's been doing is actually taking Venezuelan oil by sideways offshore platform drilling the Venezuelan oil. It's called the Orinoco. So now the oil is unique. It's not Brent crude. It's called Mare, and it has a different consistency and requires a unique refining process. But nevertheless, once that refining process is complete, it's fully compatible with industry and private automobiles, the same as any other gasoline that you use. It's just the additives and the refining process. So the price of Venezuelan Orinoco oil, right, they have the largest reserves in the world, but they're not the largest output, right? How can we unlock that, right? Because that's going to be a driver of growth. Like that's going to stabilize and keep oil prices actually relative to inflation, like lower and lower. Like it's going to be, the price is going to look like it's going up, but it's going to trail the 2.5% annual inflation, 2.5% annual inflation. Like you see what I'm saying? So price of Brent crude right now is what, $67 a barrel, something like 71. That would be a very big difference, but
it's 64 like right now.
64. Yeah. So you can imagine that just threatening, just like what are things that would make the price of Brent jump by 10 or 20%, right?
I mean, arguably, so the problem
Attacking
with Brent,
Venezuela would do that.
Brent is a completely derivatized instrument. So what that means is
Correct.
like no actual delivery happens on the Brent contract.
That's correct.
So if you, I mean,
But that also means, the the price of the experience price of oil to consumers, either national, like large scale, large buyers, which becomes what people experience at the pump, are justified by global geopolitical events, such as a war involving an oil producing country.
justified is the word. Yeah.
Yes.
That invokes a certain artificial nature of price point.
That's right. That's what I'm getting at. So, and likewise, the oil produced in Venezuela is not even Brent. So, it's
There's
just
no
a
Brent.
signal.
Brent's a word.
It's a fictional. It's a concept.
Yeah.
So, in the sense that it's derivatized, there is Brent oil, but that's not what we're talking about when we talk about the price of Brent.
Yeah, Tom Luongo talks a lot about that.
So the point is that justifying an increase in the price of Brent would happen if you had an attack on Venezuela, right? But if Chevron and Exxon are inside the information loop on the true limited nature of any potential like kayfabe or optical attack on Venezuela, and if the US was saying like to them, like, we are not going to allow these deals that you have in front of you to go forward if you try to raise prices based upon kinetic activity, right? And because we're guaranteeing that you don't even have that justification right now, because whenever the press asks the president about attacking Venezuela, he says either no or I don't know, right? And the actual activity going on is drug interdiction and not regime change in Venezuela, nor war on Venezuela. So you really have to separate, like, this is why I started the show talking about people talking about war driving the prices of things such that ultimately that pulls decisions in that direction if cooler heads are not prevailing. I know it takes a while, like we have to go to part one, but like I know we weaved wide, but this is the point I'm driving home, is that actually read these newspapers of record, whether it's Politico or the New York Times or Washington Post or whatever, NPR, BBC, Reuters, AFP or AP. Look at what is coming out from them and look at what they always cite. They say, said a White House official on condition of anonymity, right? That is the CIA Mockingbird language that like, you remember when you were in 9th or 10th grade high school English, they said that if you cite someone, you have to cite it. You can't just make up. You got to cite them.
Yep.
You can't just make that shit up.
That's the code for, like, we're just making this up.
That's the code for making it up.
Yep.
Just believe me, bro.
You know? What was that? Yeah, trust. What is it? Trust me, bro. That's like, what's your source? Bro. Your source is trust me, bro.
It's trust me, bro.
Yeah.
That's what. So the trust me, bro ecosystem, man. It's the trust me, bro economy that the CIA.
That's fucking great. Excuse my language. We gotta do something with that.
We gotta meme that. Yeah.
We gotta the trust me, bro information economy.
Yes. And then you've got people that they're using. Then you've got people that are very bad analysts, very bad geopolitical analysts, that because like fear sells, fear sells, like it's called fear porn. And it's the reason it's called fear porn is not because it has naked ladies in it. It's because of how it affects the amygdala, right? It affects the amygdala and it triggers, you get dopamine. You would not think it, you would, but you actually get dopamine releases from negative information. And then you're stoking, you've got the cortisol, you've got the adrenaline and cortisol, right? You've got, so you, even then when people feel that they, even though it's such a dark picture of the world, at least they feel that they've got their arms around it and they understand it, and then they're going to get a serotonin release from understanding a dark scenario. So you're going to have,
it might be a dark picture, but at least it's a picture.
At least it's a picture, and you're going to get the reward for that. You're going to get your brain chemistry is going to reward you. So you have doom scrolling, and it's shocking. And so it's kind of like, a lot of people might be like, why do people like the combination of cocaine and heroin at the same time? Or why would somebody have an Irish coffee or whatever? Like, why would someone have coffee and alcohol at the same time? Like, why would, and just ask Hunter Biden, like, why these things go together so well. So people are having like these depressants, your internally produced, neurochemical depressants and stimulants at the same time. They're becoming addicted to, and then they're getting addicted to the reaction of wars happening, right? That's also driving, when masses all believe that, there's another dimension that I don't want to speak to because it's beyond, this realm, and I'm going to stay in my lane. But there's a lot of things going on with human beings in the larger world that are also, more than just markets and things like this, and politics in the materialist sense, that all those archons are being stoked as well. Then you've also got the market predictions driving market outcomes, right?
Yep.
And then volume traders and big players then need those outcomes to take place, and then they're willing to take shots at presidents or attempt assassinations or attempt to do impeachments or something, or soft coups or whatever. Like it goes to that level, or a false flag to start a conflict. So they get into starting even false flags to start conflicts that the people that are like the anti-war crowd of analysts have conjured into existence, right? So yeah. It's like, so people don't understand the ecosystem, but once they do, then they understand that it's better to look for the complete and the whole picture, and not just be satisfied. Like, sometimes bad shit's going to happen, and sometimes that's the accurate forecast, like independent of collective, thought. But often it's not. And to make sure that the bad things are not amplified, or that only the necessary bad things happen, people have to get past the doom scrolling, the black pill. That has to be like an addiction, like other addictions that people have to get over, right? And so that was the point that I was, but in making that point, I hope we've cast some light on actual U.S. investment in Venezuela, and then how that relates to U.S.-Russia rapprochement, how that relates to the Alaska talks, like, I don't know if we said this on the last episode with V, or if I've said it elsewhere, but absolutely, with Iran, you have the Russians building these 8 reactors in Iran that are based on zero enrichment. So you have zero enrichment reactors, or Russia is going to provide the enriched uranium, or Iran will be able to produce the enriched uranium. But you only need like 2.5% to 3% enrichment to run these reactors. So very interesting is that typically speaking, you need about 90% enrichment to produce a nuclear weapon. But Iranian nuclear scientists might have been doing something quite cutting edge and even avant-garde in the field, and they might have been developing very viable, very destructive nuclear weapons that could work on 75% enrichment. There's no doubt that they crossed the threshold of 65%, and they published the fact, and they even destroyed like 7/8 of that supposedly, but they didn't destroy it. The Russians have it. That was a deal that was made under Obama, that the Russians took custody of the Iranian enriched uranium. But Iran maintained 1/8 of that, which amounts to some tonnage. I don't remember the exact tonnage, but it might be a ton of it. If they had produced 8 tons, for example, or 9 tons of it, they have a ton of it, for example. So Iran may have a nuclear weapon already and be an undeclared nuclear power. And if they're not, they should be. But I mean, you know, it just makes sense. Pakistan's a nuclear power. India's a nuclear power. Israel's an undeclared nuclear power, hypocritically, with their relationship with Iran and their complaints. But yeah, on Venezuela, there's nowhere in the world that it makes sense. The U.S. thinking on Russia has to be understood globally. This isn't just like Putin and Trump are homies. Like, this is a reorientation of understanding the world. This is not the world that existed before 2017. Like this, we are in a new day. This is a different geopolitical arrangement of the powers of the world. And this is about long-term thinking. Like, this is about the Chinese learning from the Americans and the Americans learning from the Chinese. What do I mean by that, Nick? The Chinese have to learn from the Americans that you will be the victim of your own success if your empire overextends. What the Americans learn from the Chinese is that we can't fundamentally have a system that's driven quarter to quarter or by market fluctuations, but we have to have a state that's more powerful than Wall Street or private parties, such that they can plan ahead 5 and 20 years or 100 years, really more like it. You know, the Chinese are planning in terms of 50s and hundreds of years today. My old colleague who passed away some years ago, he may have been murdered, named Manuel Oxenreider, used to say, you know, Joachim, he called me Joachim because he was German.
Okay.
He said, yeah, he said, we Eurasianists think in terms of thousands of years. You know,
yeah,
it was a fair point. It was a salient one. The issue at hand, Nick, is that everywhere in the world, it behooves the United States to invest in with Russia, not just in Russia, but in Venezuela, in anywhere else, and to make Russia stronger, not because China has a bad conspiracy today against Russia or against the world per se, right? But as China gets more powerful, right, later generations of Chinese leaders will have delusions of grandeur. They'll have delusions of power, and they won't have the work ethic and diplomatic outlook that the generation that made China rise had.
right. You've talked about this.
This is like the Spenglerian, Toynbean. Yes, it's Spengler and Toynbee And it's also like the old or the new adage from 2016, but it was a meme for a long time, you know, is that um, weak societies produce strong men produce uh, strong societies, thriving societies produce weak men, right? Complacent men, and those weak men produce, non-thriving societies. So this is of course, it's put much more eloquently than I did, but that's a general idea. And this is a variation of Spenglerian concepts of cycles of civilization, or cycles of, I will say, civilization. He used the word civilization negatively. He would say civilization was already the point at which the plot was lost. I was just saying broadly the cycles of civilization. So the Chinese don't want to replace the United States as a world global hegemon, because then in short time they're going to face the same problem that the United States is unwinding from today.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
hegemony is not
therefore,
a very affordable enterprise.
that's right. Global unipolar hegemony is not a good long-term outcome. You will pay for those successes very expensively and quite soon. So,
Well, unless you're running the game, and then you can just pawn off the loss on your citizens of your countries, but your corporations can continue to profit.
you want to think, and that's a fair point, but you want to think in terms of not the Chinese leadership that exists today, right? But what they might, after XJP is deceased, and the guys who are like 25 years old or 35 years old today move up in the party hierarchy, and then they're in power, right? They're going to be looking at Siberia. They're going to be looking at the Philippines or Thailand or Vietnam or Japan or South Korea as a nice piece of real estate to assume. So what's going to keep future generations from getting stupid ideas is if other regions and other poles are stronger. So the Euro-Atlantic post-Nazi CIA, the people who took power in the United States after the assassination of Kennedy, let's say, but really you had these issues with Truman as well. But the Euro-Atlantic, transatlantic globalist idea was that the West would control Russia, and that would be what contains China. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I would take it back to take it back to Woodrow Wilson.
Yes, yeah. And that's not what happened. I have an uninvited mosquito guest here, so just a little distracting. But that is what happened. And they had this idea that they could destroy Russia, and then that would be able, then they could take on China, and that they were going to rule the world. That's not what happened. So the stupidity is that the more that they think that they're going to, the more that they've been trying to contain and weaken Russia, that they and actually they've privileged China to make that happen. Like they also thought they were going to take over China. Like, so they were building up China going back to the late 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And they believed that they were going to be able to be in the position. They underestimated Chinese strategic thinking and long-term planning. And so the failure of Tiananmen Square was the failure of these Western powers to take control politically of China. So, but I don't know if I've lost you, if we've lost the stream.
No, I'm here.
All right. So, but that's the basic thinking, Nick. So,
well, I think the Chinese learned from the Opium Wars.
They learned a lot from the Opium Wars. There's a lot of hubris and ignorance on the historical outlook of ancient peoples. And we're living in the present, and we think that history starts with World War II. These people are looking back in their own history, hundreds and thousands of years, for anecdotes, lessons, ideas, things not to do again, mistakes not to do, not to repeat. So
I think China openly welcomed the we'll call them the globalist in.
Yeah.
And they made a deal that would allow capital and money and everything else to flow in.
Yeah.
And then they kicked the globalist out and kept all the business. And you know what? God bless them. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the globalists are Satanist parasites.
Yes.
That's
yes.
what I think. It was that simple. I mean, I don't think that the execution was very simple.
It was that simple. The idea was the general idea is as simple as you're saying.
Yeah, it's like, hey, we know what they did with their gunboat diplomacy back in the 1800s. Like, we know how they operate. Did you get them?
No, so close yet so far. But yeah, son of a bitch, dude. Yeah, no, he's driving me nuts, or she rather. But you know, all mosquitoes that suck blood are females. Like all the ones that attack are females.
Yeah, the male proboscis can't fit through the skin.
Yes, they don't. Look at that. Hold on, where is that? Look at that. I got her.
You got her.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, they can't bite through at least not through human skin. I don't know if they can bite other, things.
Well, the females are taking the blood and they're actually feeding their eggs with it.
Mm. How do the males eat?
Yeah, so I don't know. I'm not like an expert on insects, but I had to learn about mosquito. I have apparently sweet blood. And like if we're like camping, like if we're all out together, like I'm the one that gets all the mosquitoes and shit. Yeah. So I don't know if it's like hormones or pheromones or but supposedly I have sweet blood for mosquitoes. So, but yeah. So Venezuela, what I wanted to say was that people are saying that the United States is going to attack Venezuela and affect regime change, and that's a polarizing statement to make that puts two different claims together, and it makes it harder for me to explain my forecast, because in my forecast, the United States very well easily can attack Venezuela. And in fact, in some ways, that makes part of the illusion, depending on the vested in interest that we're talking about in this market sense, it can placate them, or kind of, speaking of mosquitoes or vampires rather, it can, like as Martin Luther said, like giving them a lick of the bottle or whatever, like giving them some of that, juice or whatever, that they're investing in the idea of the consequences on certain markets of certain not just industries but specific companies for war, and they could experience that stock dividend or that whatever by doing part of that, if that you see, without doing regime change. So then, but what they would attack would be a black operation, and what the media would report would be very different from what really happened. And the difficulty could be that the Venezuelans may, for their own reasons, in terms of waving the bloody shirt, just like the Iranians did, have a mixed message. Like if you really follow Venezuelan messaging, like from their inside, you're gonna understand, just like with Iran, they claim that they weren't really hit at all with anything. But when it came to like crying at the UN or making statements on press TV or statements through Russia Today or through mass or alternative mass media, the Iranians waved the bloody shirt and, oh, what a war crime, Trump is so bad. Well, yeah, but you guys were doing high level diplomacy with each other to like actually de-escalate behind the scenes. So I expect similar with Venezuela. And, before this Nobel Peace Prize stuff, Nick, before this whole story about Machado, I was saying, the difference with Venezuela and why even an optical attack makes less sense to see is because there isn't like this Israel interest involved in that. Right. And then, after I say this, then it's like someone's like, oh, aha. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's just how it works. Then we have Machado reaching out to Netanyahu and Netanyahu congratulating Machado. And now I'm seeing that they want to open up Venezuela for Israel as an alternative to rapprochement with Saudi Arabia, which would make the Abraham Accords fail. And the success of the Abraham Accords in the final analysis is contingent upon a thriving and developing Palestinian entity. So that's how the story. So Venezuela plugs into this Gaza and Israel and Saudi Arabia story, very, very seriously.
Yeah. So that's the thing. It's the Israel connection. And I mean, as soon as the Nobel Peace Prize came into the picture, I'm like, oh, okay, well, clearly there's a connection there.
Yeah.
That's just like enough. And just the simple Machado, the Trump like dismissal or disavowal, I'm like, oh, okay, we know who the player is here. So it seems that that Israel may have her own interest involved when it comes to like Venezuelan oil, etc. But it also seems that their power in the world is not increasing at this point. I think for a number of reasons. So, it would be nice to have the balance of power shift back towards sovereign interests as a whole for most countries. That's what I'd like to see.
Yeah.
Mutual self-interest, all the stuff Matt Aaron talks about.
Yeah, I believe, Matt's on a very good track with these things. And I enjoy and agree with many of the things that Tom Luongo is saying as well. Of course, like, people that are following these things are going to track different angles, and they might arrive at some different conclusions at times, or sometimes they might speak again after a long time and get back on each other's track. That's happened a few times with Tom. I know he's spoken with me and said, oh, for a while I was thinking one thing, and then I was hearing what you were saying, and actually that makes more sense, and you've won me back to this idea. So that's happened like one or two times live, actually, with Tom Luongo on his.
To his credit, he'll reference you or whoever that might have happened with. Like, Tom's definitely willing to self-reflect.
Yeah, that's a very, I like the man as a man, actually, like, in talking to him, like, privately. Like, I know it's like people talk to each other, behind the scenes. I've talked to Matt countlessly. I've talked to Tom quite a bit, and he's really a good guy, so, and self-reflection is a big part of it. And hey, look, like, for example, like with Venezuela, I could be wrong. I mean, it could happen that that regime changes in the cards and they want to do something like this, and I would have to, rethink, and that in a way that would be cool for me because I would get to improve or retool my thinking, and not get it wrong in the future. On the other hand, I don't think that Maduro is a bad guy. Like, I'm not of the belief that, my analysis of Venezuela's political economy is that most of the economic problems that they are having are the result of the U.S. embargo and the European Union embargo. And, it's foolish to have that embargo on them when they're a very large, oil producer. And you can see, there are many different angles people running. I mean, for example, like, Mohammed bin Salman, MBS in Saudi Arabia, reaching out to and speaking with the Colombian drug lord president Gustavo Petro might not be a good thing for Venezuela or for Trump. I mean, the idea that people get along, and that doesn't mean they can't be triangulating or trying to push other deals on the side that then push their other partners in that direction. I mean, It's not a black and white thing, and nor do a lot of people at this level take offense personally to these things. But like what was taken offense personally was JD Vance said he took the offense personally when he was visiting in Israel and they tried to stage this annexation of Gaza, annexation of the West Bank legislation. You know, so those things do happen in terms of provocations. I don't see why it would make sense to overthrow Maduro. I know, see, like people might have a moral narrative from conservative media that Maduro is just a bad guy or something, but I don't know what. I guess people are just satisfied to hear that he's a bad guy and therefore it must be true. Like what you're going to get this a lot from it, and it's a very complicated media ecosphere, but from Trump, MAGA, or Trump adjacent stuff, they just kind of follow his every word sometimes, and like they go along with it. Like you saw how many people when Trump in effect coordinated his attack with Iran to attack Iran, people didn't know that this was happening. I think I might have been the only person or one or two people on the planet that was saying, in fact, what was happening, and that's what was revealed to have happened. But everyone else was saying, oh yeah, like now we're going to overthrow Iran. And it was like, now it's going to be regime change. And you had, Pahlavi running around doing the circuit on media. Like people were expecting that that the United States was going to like install him. It's just like the magic of Trump is in concealing the fact that the United States doesn't have the military power to do these things anymore. But he makes it look like policy or compromise. And that's fine with me. Like the point is the wars are not happening. He just talks like the wars are going to happen. Now, the United States could do a lot with what it has. It could do a lot of damage to infrastructure, but you would need, 3 or 4 million soldiers to invade Iran.
Yeah, no, that ain't happening. Like, V talks about it. There was it was a simulation done maybe 25 years ago. And I think it was like a U.S. retired admiral, perhaps general something, who took the side of being Iran. Yeah. And it was very simple to defeat the U.S. Outside of some kind of a nuclear strike, which is a Pyrrhic victory at best. They were able to take down all of the naval ships and assets in the area just by shooting enough conventional missiles at them. Like the invasion of, I think, land wars and invasions of, people don't understand how well armed Iran, whatever you want to call it, is. They have a massive military. They're ready for it. They're a very big country. People don't get how big of a landmass Iran is. Right. This isn't fucking. Right. I'm trying to tone down the cursing. This isn't Kuwait. Like
it's not Kuwait.
Yeah,
it's not Kuwait. It's not a little tiny country. It's not, it's
they've been militarily
huge. It has 92 million people. It's, there's a lot of uneducated people, man. I don't want to sound like a dickhead, but there's a lot of fucking morons on the right and on the left as well. But we're talking about the ones that think or believe or want some combination of think, believe, or want that an attack on Iran is viable. Likewise, people don't understand Venezuela. Like Venezuela has about a dozen S350 or S300 upgrade to, they're basically S400s. And then they have Chinese variants. The Chinese have a version similar to what Serbia has acquired. Like Venezuela has invested in military huge, and they have, you know, they have Sukhois and MiGs and F-16s. They have anti-air systems that are present generation. Like, I don't think that, I think a lot of Americans have like watched too many fucking movies. I know Top Gun was a huge influence on people's thinking. You know, Saddam Hussein didn't have very, like, what people have to understand is that the chronology of what happened in Iraq was that there was the United States and Iran had a war, which the US was kind of backing both sides to a certain extent, but more so openly Iraq. This was called the Iran-Iraq War, and it took place through most of the 80s, and it really degraded Iraq's economy and military capacity. But they had so much of a buildup, nevertheless, and a war economy that just a few years after the Iran-Iraq War ended, and they discover that Kuwait is stealing their oil, they then ask permission from the Bush administration, number one, to take action and to annex Kuwait. And if you look geographically, and if you go back in history, it is supposed to be part of Iraq. I'm not trying to offend the Kuwaiti royal family. If I ever visit, I don't want to get arrested. Like, they exist. They have a right to exist. Don't get me wrong. But historically, it's part of Iraq. And he asked permission. He was set up, and then they were attacked big time. And then they were placed under further sanctions for the next 10 years that degraded their military capacity before the U.S. actually did an occupation. So there was like 3 steps to even taking on Iraq. It wouldn't have been possible for the U.S. Like fuck all the G.I. Joe thinking and the, you know, Top Gun thinking. Like, the United States is just a country. Our soldiers are just soldiers. They're not, like, there's a lot of a cult of what it means to be a Navy SEAL or what it means to be a Green Beret. And they think that like one guy with a machine gun like mows down like 50 brown-skinned people. Like, you know, it's just, there's like a lot of subtle racial culture. There's a lot of, I don't want to get into.
Come on, we get to go to take out John Matrix. Come on. Yeah, let off some steam, Bennett.
Yeah, that's it. Let off some steam, you know. Yeah, Commando was great, you know, but Jenny, yeah, but there was you think about all the Colombians, you know, or whatever the fuck it was. But yeah, I mean, there's fiction. There's like army bro fiction to the extent that people read in that milieu about, you know, wars in Latin American jungles. And sometimes you'll be watching future science fiction, like near future science fiction, and they'll talk about, oh, the Latin American wars or something, or the wars in the Colombian jungles and stuff.
Predator,
so there's some
Predator
predictive programming around stuff like that, you know, too, right? So, but realistically, like, Venezuela has an advanced and modernized military, and they've invested heavily. Like, so who's going to invade Venezuela, right? The United States could. So their whole fucking doctrine is matched to account for how to focus on strengthening the most vulnerable things that would arise from the asymmetry. Does that make sense? So
yeah.
They've hyper invested in exactly those things that the U.S. would rely on, like air or naval. So they have focused on anti-vessel missiles and rockets. They've hyper invested on anti-air ground systems. They've invested in air-to-air in terms of defensive perimeter to discourage all types of adventures that could take place. There have been numerous attempts to overthrow both Maduro and Chavez by the Americans already. There was even one that was pretty significant in 2019 or something, 2018. And basically, Trump did the same thing as Kennedy. So there was basically a type of a Bay of Pigs invasion that occurred in Venezuela,
Piglets, right?
Bay of Piglets.
Yeah.
And
I think they call it that.
I think they did, but it was, yeah, there was, that's, they, they go in and you had these, Blackwater Z, whatever, Greystone, Eric Prince type outfits, under some, working with Floridian Venezuelan guys that, cartel and et cetera, anti-Chavez, anti-Maduro elements from Florida. This is just like Bay of Pigs, except it's like 40 years later. It's bizarre. So they already tried this. And we see, like, they attempted a military coup against Chavez like 22 years ago. And the Venezuelans are being advised by like former Soviet KGB experts in coup and counter coup strategies, and tactics. And so, in other words, like, one of the things that you do is you pretend that you have compromised generals. So you have your guys pretend to be bought off. So they get the money. So it's cool. They get all the American money. They pretend that they're bought off. They're informing on the plans of the coup, right? Because they're loyal to the structure, because it's like a cult. Like, have you ever tried to deal with like a Jehovah's Witness or a Mormon? So they're like, I'm not trying to offend people, but like, you understand that, like, you're not going to shake them from that.
No way.
Like, okay, so you're not going to shake these people from Chavez, and you're not going to shake them from Maduro. Like, there is a cult around their personality. Like, you cannot get to them to poison them. There was a cult around Castro. They tried to kill him like 400 times. They tried to like give him drugs to make his beard fall off so he loses legitimacy. They tried exploding cigars. They tried hot bitches with big titties, and he seduced them instead. Like, there was like all kinds of things going on, bro, all the fucking time. They could not get to Chavez. They could not get to Castro. They could not get to Maduro. And then militarily, it's kind of a no-go. So that doesn't mean the United States like won't do some optics to give a, what is it called, wet the whistle of some of these war hawk forces. And in other words, like, how can you get this jump in necessary companies connected to projects to attack Venezuela? How can you get a good bump in their if they're publicly traded companies, right, in their stock value? And how can you do a pump and dump? How can you do lots of things? Maybe they're going to sell it off ultimately, but they're building up the profile. Like, yeah, Trump's definitely going to attack Venezuela. We're the company that's been making the fucking rafts, the bulletproof rubber rafts or something, because my uncle's a senator, and I'm, like, this is how it works in America. So then they're all, whenever Trump makes it sound like, yeah, we're going to attack, then the value goes up a little bit more. And then when he does attack, he's going to hit some like outpost that he's already coordinated on a deconfliction line with the Venezuelans, just like he did with Assad in Syria when he hit the fucking airport. And then, but the values of those companies are going to go up. So this is not financial advice. But what would be funny is if you just find out some of those companies, maybe buy some stock in them, and then know that you're going to sell them at not like, don't think that war is going to go on like more than a day or two, right? Like, don't think it's going to go on. So just stuff like that. That's how to think about this conflict.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like, Raytheon or, any of those type companies.
Yeah, there's going to be like smaller spin-off companies that are like
Anduril.
Yes.
Yeah.
That are providing amphibious stuff, like stuff for naval amphibious.
Somebody who makes the particular bolt that's like gonna fix the thing on the thing, and
that's the thing. That's the thing that the person might invest in, but that's not advice. So then,
no.
Yeah. We're just
We
saying
don't
what a
give
person
advice here.
might do. There's no advice. It's just talking about objectively what people are doing. So
Nice. So we're coming towards the end here, only because I
yes,
have to jump. But so
yeah, me
and
too.
this is the okay. These kind of shows are fun because you have some time. We set aside time to kind of cover a lot of different things, but the
Yes.
overarching theme here is that not everything is as it seems. You have
Mm-hmm.
sort of these branches, both on the nominal left and the nominal right,
Mm-hmm.
who and again, it relates to Israel and it relates to Gaza and the way that, you had certain groups on the left that needed things to happen this way and certain groups on the right that actually needed the same outcome. And a lot of it has to do with, just kind of blunting the blunting the blade of the anti-globalist, if you will, or sharpening the blade of the globalist, or both, keeping
Right.
people in power, keeping the money flowing a certain way, whatever it might be. And then we might end up seeing what is overtly a response, if you will, or an incursion, or whatever word you want to use, that the U.S. does to Venezuela, and it might look a lot like what happened to Fordo, and or perhaps what happened to the abandoned airfield in Syria back in 2017.
Yes, might be as little as that or as much as that, but not more than that.
Right. It'll be a limited situation that might be overblown. And I remember after Fordo and whatever the other after the Tomahawks, we'll say, in Iran,
Yes,
because I know it
yes.
wasn't just Fordo; it was the other plant too. I just can't
Yeah,
remember the name.
Isfahan, yeah.
Yeah,
The other
what is it
one,
called?
yeah. Isfahan.
Isfahan. So after those two, I remember like the word that kept being repeated by everybody was obliterated. It's like, okay, everybody, we're all going to use the word obliterated. So Iran's nuclear capabilities are obliterated now. Okay, say it with me.
Didn't Trump say it was like Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Didn't he say that?
I wouldn't doubt it. I don't remember that exactly, but
No,
yeah,
he did though. People will fact check. It's after the show. Look, dude, you'll have a bigger laugh because I'm not making that up, dude. He said it was like Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and then it was like I think I when he said that, I'm like, bro, I bet they had a script. Like I bet that was the script, and they were gonna have like a CGI version of Fordo being hit, and it would have looked like a mushroom cloud or something. And then they were like, no, it's gonna look too fake. It's gonna look faker than Elon's reverse landing rocket, or faker than when he sent the sports car into space. Like now people are going to call that shit out, and then we're going to have to say the reason it looks fake is because it's real, and now let's not try it. So but sometimes the script of what you get is from a thing they didn't do, or a plan, or part of the plan that they didn't do. But yeah, he said it was Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And then you look at it, it's like, the meme of like with the Chinese guy going like, oh, it's so small. Like it was, if you look at the strikes on Fordo, they're like, you're
yeah,
like,
yeah.
you're like, what did they do?
They dropped
Like,
a couple of M80s on like an ant hill or something.
honestly, dude, it was like firecrackers on an anthill.
Yeah.
Anyway, man, thank you for having me on. I hope to do it again soon.
Yeah, we'll do it again soon, man. I'll coordinate with V a little bit better so that we have either, we'll just make sure that we have the time slot. And but I know it's getting late for you. It's got to be pretty late over there at this point, yeah? Like dinner time?
Yeah.
Let's let you get back to your family and your wife and kids. And thanks again for coming on. Always a pleasure. Everybody, look in the description. Make sure you check out XF, and the quality of what's going on the Telegram is good, but check out the Patreon. Let's give XF a little support. He doesn't have like, Tim Pool or Scott Ritter type people backing him. He doesn't have Whitney Webb type people backing him. I think, XF is just
That's
pretty
right.
much doing it himself. So support this man. XF,
That's it,
we'll do
man.
it again soon.
Nobody buys peace. Nobody
Yeah,
buys
yeah.
peace.
No, that's true.
Yeah.
Nobody buys peace that's not profitable.
But make the difference and invest in some sound analysis, and you get access to I do a public live stream, but I don't keep the recordings available to the public. So if you catch it live, you catch it. So through the Patreon, you actually get access to that, and it's kind of an honor system in there because you get to download all of them, but immediately if you want. But please think about keeping that a sustained pledge, a sustained contribution. Because if I can't make this happen, you're going to lose voices that tell the truth, because I'm going to have to work for someone that wants me to lie. And I do have a family to feed. So, you know what I mean? Like, I'm a person. Like, even Alex Jones said, you know, if you cut off the food, I'm going to come and eat you or some shit. So, like, allow me to keep telling the truth. I only rely on the public for support. So if you appreciate someone that cuts through the left and right noise bullshit and cuts through the headlines and dedicates hours a day to actually figuring out what's going on, please support the work. And I think you'll find it worth your while. Thank you.
Oh, definitely worth it. It's worth my while. And the last thing I'll say is, if you're tired of black pill, you know, if you're tired of black pill, because that's just, I can't. I mean, I get it, dude. I lived black pill, and there are aspects of what is going on, but yeah, just, you know, this. I may not be terribly religious, but let's just say something's gonna have your back out there.
Yep.
All right, guys.
Anyway, man, thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure.